Hey everybody. Dr. Adam Mathews with Mathews Counseling, and every single month we try to bring you different resources around mental, emotional, and behavioral and relational health. And it is May, so we're fully in spring. Summer is just around the corner, and we are talking about this month about our story, our personal stories, and how the story of our life and how it is helpful, how we tell our stories and why telling our stories are important. And today we have one of our amazing interns, Tom, here with us. Tom, thanks for joining us. Thanks for being here and sharing with us. And we're talking about kind of the idea of how our finding meaning in our stories, in the story of our lives, and really attaching that meaning and making it what we want. And there's a lot of ideas that people really don't know how much particularly their inner story shapes their lives. So, talk to me a little bit about how these kind of narratives start forming in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This is a topic that I'm really passionate about and love speaking to clients about. That, yeah, a lot of times the stories that we tell ourselves are obviously developed in childhood, like a lot of behavioral patterns are. So sometimes you don't even realize as you're growing up what the thing that's going to stick with you from your childhood is. But then once you grow up out of it, start recognizing your own independence and developing your own worldview, you tend to realize that there are these voices in the back of your head that are telling you, that are informing that worldview, saying that it's not this way, it's probably more that way. And you don't even realize where those voices come from until you kind of dig a little bit deeper into it and realize, oh, that's because
Yeah.
of the story that my parents told me growing up, that the world works this way. That you had the question about, why does this happen, or what's that over there, and the way that they answered it just
Yeah.
became the way that you saw the world. And until you really dug into it and questioned it, it was something that you just assumed to be true.
Yeah.
And that can be beneficial for a lot of people if they heard really good stories that gave them this very open worldview full of possibilities. For other people, maybe they were told a story that was much more limiting, that there's only one way that this could be or that they could be. And so when they look at the world and try and discover their place in it, they feel like it has to follow this one specific, more dogmatic
Yeah.
vision than one that has a million different possibilities and journeys and endings.
Yeah, I think one thing that people don't fully realize is that those stories that are told to us also become these internalized stories. Like we are the hero of our own stories, and it's how we kind of construct that inner narrative about our life. We all have main character energy in our own story, right? Like that is who we are. And so those stories that become our reality in a lot of ways. They become the way that we situate ourselves in the story of our lives becomes the reality through which we live. So talk to me a little bit about kind of you talked about kind of some people their stories become limiting. Give me some examples of stories that end up being really limiting to us?
Yeah, I think one that is specific but still pretty broad is you take people who struggle with anxiety. That's a very common thing, especially in this day and age where everything is designed to make us more and more anxious. We open our
Yeah.
phones and immediately cortisol levels spike. A lot of times, anxiety is the enemy in our story, the bad guy that we are pushing
Yeah.
back against, that we're trying to figure out a way to defeat or at least reduce the effects of. So, for people struggling with anxiety, if they were given a very limiting story growing up about anxiety or depression or other mental health considerations that a lot of times the generations above us didn't always have as wide a worldview on, or as many different ideas surrounding. So, they might have delivered this more limiting story. And if you're an individual that's now struggling with anxiety, you might hear those same stories in the back of your head telling you that the anxiety, it's an issue with you. There's something wrong with you, that you're feeling this way. And if you can't kick it, if you can't just stop feeling that way, it's because you're not strong enough, or because there's some other underlying symptom that is defective. And I think that's what you see a lot with people. And anxiety is one example, but there are a lot of different things that we feel like if I'm struggling with something, it's because of me and because I am
Yeah.
inherently flawed.
Yeah, and I think that's a great place to start too, because I think one of the things that happens, what you're describing is that as a person, we become the problem, right? The problem isn't separated from who we are. It's just part, and that makes it hard. But there's a shift that happens for people when we can start to see ourselves as separate from the problem. Talk to me a little bit about that. Like that, when that happens, why is that important first? Let's start there for your
Yeah.
standpoint.
I think it's incredibly important to separate yourself from the problem itself instead of saying, I have anxiety or I am anxious or I am depressed. I'm dealing. Yeah, it's more important to look at it as I'm battling anxiety. I am, dealing with anxiety, dealing with depression. That's this external thing. I think it's important to answer your question because that in and of itself gives you a certain amount of agency over the
Yeah.
situation. That if it's something within you, if it's the thing that's pulling the strings and steering the wheel, then you feel a little bit powerless, like you're in the back seat of the car. Just well, where's anxiety going to take me today? It's the
Yeah.
one with the control in this situation. Whereas if you say, no, I'm the one with the control here, anxiety is in the passenger seat or it's in this other car that is pushing me on the road. But if I can maintain control over my lane and over what's happening with my direction, then you just begin to recognize the autonomy that you have. And that's not to say the anxiety just goes away, if only it were that simple. But sometimes recognizing that anxiety is this thing that lives outside of me and I am combating it, now you feel a little bit more empowered in that pursuit rather than
Yeah.
feeling defeated by, well, it's who I am and it's the way that it is.
Yeah, and those things too to me are so subtle sometimes because we don't really sometimes recognize those story elements that we're telling ourselves and where that comes to play, and how that has become entrenched, right? Those entrenched narratives about
Mm,
how I work, how the world works, how I work in the world, right? And it's really shifting the villain from me or somebody else to this thing that is the anxiety. I am not the anxiety. The anxiety is affecting me, and it gives us. I think you're absolutely right. It gives us a lot more control. How do you feel like we start to recognize those narratives? How do we start to understand those narratives that kind of have shaped us and that have become entrenched?
yeah, I think the big question that I like to ask my clients that are kind of showing me that they are working with this particular story, I'll ask them, "Where did you hear that?"
Mm.
Or "Why did you begin to believe that that's the way things are?" And a lot of times people have never even considered that question, that it's XYZ, this is the way that the world works. I'm like, "Well, who told you that?" Like, "Oh,
Yeah.
well, my parents or my uncle or my brother or whoever, wherever they heard it." But sometimes I realize, oh, it is just something that someone told me. The same
Mm.
way someone could tell me that the sky is green and I could look right up at it and say, well, no, it's not, but they told me that it is. So how much am I willing to put aside my own worldview and accept
Mhm.
theirs just because they're saying, well, this is the way that it is?
Yeah. It's a lot of like what you're talking about is it's a lot of just introducing doubt. Like, is this actually true, or is it something that I've believed because of a lot of things, circumstances, family, how I grew up, my
Mm-hmm.
culture, my who I am, my personality, and begin to reflect on that a little bit more. And what when you think about like this idea, like I know like you said, story, the idea of story and how we create meaning from our story is very passionate, or is very passionate for you. Like, what makes this type of way of thinking and thinking about our life so freeing if we start to kind of see ourselves like this story that we're telling ourselves, and that it can ultimately be rewritten, that we can find more meaning in it and change how we're thinking about it.
I think the truly freeing piece of the puzzle is the telling of the story itself, and not just to ourselves, but to the people around us, our closest friends, our family, our relationship partner,
Hmm.
whatever our whoever's in our circle, sometimes when we believe things about ourselves that were either pre-programmed, that were given to us, or the things that we
Mhm.
have begun to write for ourselves, they don't really become true to us until we see ourselves in the way people see us. That
Yeah.
if you begin to present your news story to your inner circle, to the people closest to you, and they begin to show you, I see you for this story, not the old one that you had been telling yourself that you had accepted to be true, but this
Yeah.
new one that you have begun telling, that I can see that shift in you. That is what makes things true. You know, if you think
Yeah.
about the, and this is getting a little bit deeper in the weeds, but if you think about the idea of objective truth in the world, that if we all agree that something is true, it becomes true. Because
Yeah.
if everyone in the whole world said this is absolutely true, that's, 2 + 2 = 4, we all agreed, yes, 2 + 2 does equal 4. But if everyone agreed that it now equals 5, and everyone wanted to justify that and believe that's true, it inherently becomes true. And so you bring that down to the level of your
Mm.
life where you say, this is what's now true for me, what I've learned about myself and the person that I want to be and how I present. You show that to the people around you, and they all turn back to you and say, that is true. That is you. I see that. I see that in you. Now you really become free of those old stories that weren't serving
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, like I think the other thing that I think you're saying, but I want to be clear about too, is that like there's contrast there too. Is like when I tell that story to somebody else, like they may go, "Oh, I don't like." If we tell our old story to somebody else too, like this is the story, they may go, "I don't see that to be true at all," right? Like,
Yeah,
or this was different for me in this way, right? Like I think there's that kind of sense that we reaffirm each other's stories, but we can also offer some kind of contrast to that, which could then there may be a story that we're holding on to that has been feels like it's been true for us our whole life, and then we tell it, and somebody else goes, "Well, wait a minute," like you said, like as to your clients, who told you that was true? How did you come to that? That doesn't make sense. There's a lot of ways that we can go that's beneficial when we begin to tell our stories and sharing those as well. And then just connect a little bit to us about this idea of finding meaning. Like as when you're working with clients and trying to help them, how do you help them find meaning in their stories in that way? What's the movement there for them?
yeah. I think sometimes it's zooming out on the content of day to day life, that we have the routines that we assume every day, we have the job that we go to, we have all the things that kind of make up this picture of what our life is. But that inherently is difficult to find meaning in because it just is. You can't
Mm,
contextualize it in the moment. There's a quote that I like that I'm going to butcher, but something to the effect of that life can only be lived moving forward and it can only be understood looking backwards. That you can't
mm,
make sense of your life necessarily in the moment. But if you can zoom out and look at the last couple chapters, now all of a sudden you can see where each thing was leading. And that
yeah,
to me is what delivers the meaning of it all. That today I do this thing and tomorrow I do this other thing, and we keep going, going, going. But then a year later, I can look back on it and be, oh, the thing that I was just doing, that actually was setting up this whole new adventure that this new shape my life was going to take. And I
mm,
didn't realize it at the time, but now that I can work through that and recognize that period of time for what it was, it gives it a lot more meaning. The same way you would look at high school or college experience for a lot of people, that while you're in it, it just feels like this, fog
yeah,
of day-to-day assignments and social events and all this different stuff. But then you look back on and you say, that was the time that I became X or this or that. For everyone,
yeah.
it's a different answer. But once you're on the other side of it, you can then assign meaning to it that in the moment you couldn't.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that, like, for me personally, has been really powerful is that idea that we get to assign meaning to these events that happen to us,
Mm,
right? And we get to, obviously, we validate our hurt, we validate like the harm that happens, we can see that clearly, but there's a lot of ways that we get to shift that meaning and that it can be very healing and can be very powerful in how we begin to move forward and how we begin to live forward. What that changes when we begin to have new meaning that we're giving to these things and how that affects us, how we look forward from that.
yeah.
Um, Tom, tell me one thing. If people are listening to this, what's the one thing you really want them to take away from it?
I think if there's one thing that I would really want people to take away from this, it's that you're the one writing your story, not your parents or your friends or anyone around you, even with the best intentions. No one knows you the way that you know you, or at least the way that
Mm,
you're capable of knowing you. And so when you dig into who you are as a person, you bring out all those stories that were old stories, current stories, new stories that you want to tell. When you look at all of those, you're the person who is in control of writing them at the end of the day. And even though it might not feel like it every single day that you're in full control of everything, and whomst amongst us is, but at the end of the day, like you said, you're the one who gets to assign the meaning as we go. You're the one who gets to decide what the next chapter of this story is going to look like
yeah.
based on the decisions that we're making now.
I love that. I think that can be so powerful. And if you are listening to this and it feels like you want to learn how to what the story is that has kind of shaped you, what you've been the story you've been telling yourself, and how to create new meaning from that, and need some help doing that, we have amazing therapists and therapist interns like Tom, who can walk you through that process. You can go to MathewsCounseling.net /therapist to find a therapist that would be right for you, might be a good fit for you, and you can request an appointment directly from that website. Tom, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And everybody, we'll see you next time. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.